Hey Russell, my name is Jeremy Gimpel. I'm an Israeli Jew and I live in the mountains of Judea, in what England calls the West Bank. Anyway, I wanted to respond directly to your video called Israel-Palestine. Can we talk about it? Well, since I'm seen as one of the most extreme elements in Israeli society, a settler in the occupied territories, I'm saying yes, let's talk. So here's my response to your video. I've broken it up into short sections, but I haven't edited out your video in any way in order that people can hear your thoughtful comments in their entirety, and then hear what an Israeli settler has to say about that.
Before you watch this video, I want you to know that in the last few days I've had conversations with very high profile figures on this subject as part of my podcast, Under the Skin. Excerpts from those conversations on the matter of Israel and Palestine will be released over the next week. If you're dissatisfied with anything that I've said or feel that I haven't represented where you sit on this spectrum correctly, please be patient and wait for these videos, because these people understand the issues much better than I do and speak very articulately from very different sides of the spectrum. Thank you.
So first of all, I want to commend you, Russell. You're hosting people from different sides of the spectrum. That's really rare today. In the past, I don't think you were as multidimensional in your approach to this conflict. And in a way, you've chosen a heroic path. It's like heroic because you're going to get hated now on both sides by this approach. I mean, it will bring more peace, unity, and understanding, but probably it's not really going to help your ratings. And that's why it's almost impossible to find any fair and balanced outlets in the mainstream media today at all. I mean, the media empires are businesses and they want to maximize their ratings. The right-wing media, like Fox News, broadcast to their demographic, and the left-wing New York Times have their agenda to push to their readers. No one wants to put off their constituents. And so, Russell, I really appreciate you working to create a deeper understanding of the issues, even at the risk of pissing off both sides, Israelis and Palestinians, Muslim and Jewish. I mean, the conflict is incredibly complex, and it's one of the most ancient conflicts in the world. So thank you.
People have been asking me to comment on the situation in Israel and the conflict between the people of the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians, and the people of Israel. And the reason I haven't is because I've been sort of doubtful that I've got anything positive to add to what seems like a situation that is defined by polarity and intransigence. There are many people who focus on the disparity between means of the two sides of combatants in this conflict. There are other people that focus on the disparity in the deaths between the sides and the human rights issues suffered by Palestinian people and the historical problems. I feel like it's such a complex and challenging problem, such a challenging issue, that by getting into it, when people ask you even to do a video, what they're really saying is, come out on my side, speak on my behalf.
Ain't that the truth? On the issue of Israel and the Palestinians, people around the world tend to have a one-sided and relatively passionate opinion on both sides. Much more so than any other conflict in the Middle East. I mean, the minority Kurdish people have been struggling for their independence from Iraq and Turkey for years. People don't really have a strong opinion to either side. The tragedy and chaos in Syria, the tribal wars in Lebanon, hundreds of thousands of people killed, more than 1 million people displaced before Corona. I didn't see any passionate one-dimensional views. It's like somehow with Israel things are different. I don't remember even seeing one rally in England over 1 million displaced Syrians before Corona. So obviously there's much more at stake in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And what you're saying here, trying to bring nuance and understanding and compassion to facilitate an actual dialogue to help people actually move forward in the world, is something that's so needed in this polarized, politically divided world.
And I feel like, as a person over here in England, and the role of the country I'm from in creating this situation historically is a sort of an important and an unhealthy and pretty tainted one, I feel like I don't have anything particularly positive to offer. I wonder sometimes what would happen if you could exempt the situation from history, from the trauma and pain of history, and look at it objectively.
Thank you, Russell. My grandfather lived under British rule. My father lived under British rule. British rule created chaos here in the Middle East. And I've never heard a British politician ever come to Israel and apologize for the mistakes of the past. Before Israel's independence, there was a place called Palestine. It was called Palestine by the British, and life for the Jews under the colonialist British rule was disastrous. The British mandate hung many Jews in the land of Israel. The British white paper blocked Jews from returning home or escaping the German war machine hell-bent on hunting down Jews. I mean, ending the British occupation was celebrated by both Jews and Arabs in the land of Israel. But when the British evacuated Israel, a conflict between the Jews and the Arabs inside the land arose. Who is going to rule the land now? So the local Arab Muslim population was backed by the larger Arab Muslim world, and in 1948, 5 countries came together to annihilate the Jews and seize control over the land. Just like another tribal war in Israel. But somehow this ill-equipped, underarmed, much smaller local Jewish population fought off those armies and stood their ground. The Jews won the war in 1948, but the conflict really continues until today. I mean, the conflict between Jews and Arabs in the land of Israel, this goes way back, way before the British were ever involved.
Of course, people from Israel and supporters of Israel say that fundamentally Hamas want to obliterate the Israeli state, and you can't negotiate with people with that kind of agenda, and that Israel is uniquely critiqued and held up to a standard that other nations or other states aren't held to. And again, because I feel like I know people across the spectrum of opinions with regard to this issue, I feel like just sad about it. You know, like I was with my children on Saturday and I ended up going past and for a moment being in a pro-Palestine protest. And, you know, I support, of course, anybody that wants to end conflict, that wants to find a peaceful solution to this ongoing, tragic, sad, historically complex problem. But I suppose what I feel is, like, what would you have any individual do other than say, can we find forgiveness in our hearts? Can we move forward? Can we look for things we have in common? Can we find love together? What are most people going to say? Oh, that's hippie, that's unhelpful. You obviously don't know anything about the history of this situation. You're asking people to forgive people that have murdered their children. You know, even when you touch upon the disparity between deaths on the sides, you know, the 250 in this latest round of the conflict, Palestinian people, including tragically, heartbreakingly, ridiculously children, and 12 Israeli deaths, a smaller figure, but 12 lives ruined, 1 child killed among them. What is there in this issue that can bring anything other than sadness?
Here's what I really, really appreciate about you, Russell. Whose hands are clean here? No one's. There's a war. It's ugly. It's a conflict. There are dead children on both sides. The fact that the Hamas shot first and rained thousands of rockets trying to kill civilians, and Israel once again attacked in war, trying to protect her civilians, trying to pinpoint the rockets at the Hamas militants responsible. In a war, people die. It's tragic. It's painful. And anyone that doesn't just cry over the death of children on both sides, something human is missing about them. And this question, I would like to ask you, Russell. When you go to the Palestinian protests in England, do you see a desire for peace and love in that protest? Or does it look like this guy? I don't know. I ask that question seriously. I'm not in England. I live in Judea, what England calls the West Bank. You see, it's much easier to push a Jew around in a place called the West Bank. It's a lot harder to say, you must evacuate Judea, you Jew. And so here I am, a settler, me and my family portrayed as the obstacle to peace in the Middle East. So I want you to know that although we're portrayed as the most radical element in Israeli society, in my heart and in the heart of so many of the people that I know, we have like a deep pain over the death of the children in this last miniature war. And I live with a deep desire for peace and hope for a future where Jews and Arabs can somehow figure this thing out.
How can any situation be resolved unless the people that are entrenched on either side are willing to change. And of course, even if you say something like that, people on both sides are, well, we've tried to change, we offered this deal. Yeah, well, we tried to change, we offered this deal. Makes me feel like, what can you do? What can you say? Is there I'd like anyone watching this video now sort of like poised above the keyboard, ready to comment, oh, but you're not considering this, you're not considering that. What possibly could I have said other than I unreservedly support your side in this situation? I offer no compassion to people of either side with regard to their particular perspective. Like, what kind of mind of God, what kind of pure and perfect consciousness is required to understand the bloodshed and suffering on both sides of this, the deep historical roots of this conflict, the bureaucratic and geographical idiocy and complexity of the construction and military conflicts that have ensued in the years since the establishment of modern Israel and where we are right now. Who is able to comment on what has happened to the displaced Palestinian people, or their suffering that goes on in Gaza, or the kind of conditions that give rise to terrorism, or the history of states like America, the United Kingdom, France, and the legacy of our colonialism? Whose hands are clean? Who in the world is free to comment on an issue like this? And if I think really when you're saying do a video, you're saying take a side, then I think you're part of the problem.
I appreciate what's being said here. We were born into this conflict. No one alive today created this conflict. I mean, you can choose your side because as a Christian, you feel more connected to the language of Judea in the Holy Land. And the Bible says the land was given to the people of Israel as a covenant with God. The historical memory that you hold is one of, biblical times. Maybe if you're a Muslim, you believe that this region is meant to be Islamic. But for the people that are neither religious Christians nor religious Muslims, perhaps consider taking a step back with a dose of humility. Try to help create a dialogue, to help create communication and understanding, and not polarize the issue even more.
You're part of the problem because, in a way, what side there is, for me, these are the two sides. Ongoing conflict, solution. And if there were a side labeled solution, then I would be on that side. All you're likely to get from speaking like that is people saying that you're naive, you're ridiculous, you've not understood the complexity. Well, who has? Who in the world speaks on this issue in a way that both sides are able to find a commensurate ease with? Who? And until you have that, until you have a perspective where the people of Israel are able to go, yes, that's cool, we could do that. And the Palestinian people are able to say, yes, this would be acceptable, whether it's two-state, one-state. If both sides of this argument require annihilation, if both sides of them require some form of vengeance, then how could there possibly be a solution? Who would you imagine could come up with something novel, original, and helpful? I suppose a better objective, rather than the giddy, somewhat aspirational goal of finding some kind of solution to this intransigent historic problem, would be, are we able to have a conversation? And even beyond an issue like this one, which is for as long as I've been alive and obviously for thousands of years been contentious, we now find ourselves unable to talk about a subject as seemingly innocuous as wearing a mask or having a vaccine or support for particular civil rights issues, or the types of language that can be used, or people's rights to pursue this kind of lifestyle. All of these things now are caught in a miasma of conflict. If I could advocate for one thing, it would be an end to polarization, to recognize that all conflict takes place in the temporal space of this limited individual experience that we're currently undergoing. It's all taking place in culture, a construct. No one knows what's real. No one knows what God is. All of us know that murder, bloodshed, violence are wrong. All of us know that there is only one outcome when the means that are pursued are militaristic and violent. Ongoing violence. Violence begats more violence.
So here, Russell, on this issue, I really disagree with you. You said that everyone knows that murder and bloodshed is wrong. And I think here we're really touching on the core issue, which is not political. It's spiritual, it's ethical, it's moral, it's religious, it's psychological. It's of like a different realm. See, before the Bible, the Middle East was a violent and cruel place. The Middle East today is a violent and cruel place. The Middle East hasn't fully adopted the values and presuppositions of Western civilization. In the Middle East, war and bloodshed wasn't categorically defined as wrong. The ancient Arab world glorified war, bloodshed. They practiced child sacrifice. For them to offer their children to their gods was the highest virtue and an honor to their gods and to their families. I mean, there's a reason so many children die on the other side. I mean, there's like maybe a subconscious reality in the minds of Hamas that really sanctifies their death. And the revelation of the Bible was to sanctify life. The Bible was brought to the world to transcend that twisted thinking and bring love, compassion, and truth to the forefront of what an honorable life is. And there's a reason the Hamas don't protect their children as well as the Israelis do. I mean, some could argue they're not protecting their children at all. It's not clear to them that their children dying in a holy war is bad. Perhaps, maybe, it's for that reason that we're in this mess to begin with, that the Jewish people were placed in this dark region to bring a light of our Bible to the darkness. Not that the Israeli government is doing that now or even trying, but maybe there's a light there that this conflict can somehow bring to the world.
And until we're able to bring a transcendent and spiritual perspective to this issue, all anyone can do is sit back and feel sorrowful about the ongoing sadness. If anyone's got a suggestion of like, no, this is what we could do to resolve the situation in the Middle East, God knows I'd love to hear it, but there's probably other places you should take it before the comment section on this video. And if what you're interested in is new means, methods for communicating, then yeah, keep me involved in that, because I believe that this is a time for clarity, transparency, openness, acceptance of one another's differences, not only with this complex, historical, challenging and difficult issue, but with the lesser issues that dominate so much of our time and cultural space now. How can we find ways of getting along with one another, allowing people to be different, allowing people to hold their own views, trying to create conditions in which we can live peacefully side by side, not aspiring for utopia or perfection, but for God's sake, something better than this.
Well, this was my favorite part of your video. I mean, there's no solution to the crisis in the Middle East. We can't solve this problem. We can only transcend it. I mean, we have to change the political language into something spiritual, into something different. Jerusalem is a holy city. It's not only a political challenge, it's a deep spiritual reality. It's a deep psychological reality. If you want to help bring peace in the Middle East, stop treating the conflict like it's another Democratic or Republican partisan political problem. Israel is a totally different kind of conflict. It's not like the racial issues in the United States. We need a totally different kind of solution here. But there is good news. If somehow Israel is able to crack the code here and figure this thing out, if some new leader arises and facilitates a paradigm shift, world peace is within range. Nothing less than that. I mean, what's at stake in Israel is of global significance. I don't believe in coincidence. And perhaps in some amazing twist of biblical destiny, Israel has found itself in its homeland, embroiled in this conflict, in this generation, for no other purpose other than to usher in a new way of thinking, a spiritual way that transcends what we're experiencing now. I mean, we're closer now to seeing world peace than we've ever been before. And I think deep down, everyone knows that whatever happens in Israel, whatever happens in the holy city of Jerusalem, will transform how the world understands reality, how the world understands God, how we understand ourselves. I mean, we're just one leader away from a global paradigm shift. And maybe in that place, there's a little bit of hope. Either way, thank you, Russell. I think this video is a serious step in the right direction. I'm proud of you. I know you're going to get hell over it, but stay strong and courageous. And thank you. Shalom from the mountains of King David.